Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, Chapter 4, Halacha 1, Part 3 of the Shir, the final part of the Shir, and in the Art Scroll 35a1. This is going to get a little bit complicated, so we're going to try to make it as simple as possible. The last part of the Mishnah says regarding Trumas Meiser, that gets separated from produce of Demai, that returns back to its place. In other words, he's saying that it fell back into the pile that it was separated from, or perhaps there's a different pile and it falls into that one. By the way, in those two cases will be two different halachas. Now, it's saying that even during the week, one may ask the seller whether the produce he sold him was tithed, and he can eat the produce based on his word. This is going to be a leniency. Really asking. Here's the crux of it, okay? He's really asking Demai and even Trumos Meiser of Demai. And you're talking now about Meduma. All the laws of Meduma, by the way, you can find over in Orlah 2:1. By the way, Masechet Orlah, chapter 2, is one of the hardest chapters, I think, in the entire Shas in either the Bavli or the Yerushalmi. Part of it is because the language is it's very short and it's very hard to get the meaning out of it. Very complicated subjects as well. Over there, they're talking about Meduma, and the Meduma is going to be a Doraita thing, right? So when you're having Doraita Trumas Meiser that falls back in to a pile, is that going to make it Doraita Tevel? Well, what they're trying to really do in this leniency, in this Mishnah, is they're trying to talk about if you can extend those laws of Meduma over into Demai. That's really what we're asking. What's going to be coming up is, are you going to, like in Meduma for Doraita things that fall in and you have now a mixed pile, the nullification in this case is going to be 100 to a 1, right? 101. So if you have, say, 100 units like sa'ah of grain and, one sa'ah falls into it, that is going to get nullified. By the way, if there were 99 and 1, that'll be 1 in 99, 1 in 100. It's not the 101st. So you need to have 100 units, not 99 units. And then the first unit that goes in, that's what's going to be nullified. Anything under that is not going to be nullified. And we're going to get into this actually in Masechet Trumos. They're going to give the derivation for why it's going to be 1 in 100. Okay, it actually comes from, in the Yerushalmi, they're going to actually give you a source in the Torah for why that is. And, by the way, it's going to give you a source for why, when you're talking about Kalayim, it's going to be 1 in 200. And they have a source for that as well. Anyway, over here, the question is, when this falls into the Meduma pile, and you have a mixture, are you going to have it nullified like a Doraita thing, where it's going to be 101? Or is it going to be nullified in a simple majority? So, in other words, if you have 51 units of Demai that has been separated, definitely separated, and you have 49 that fall in that have also been, separated out, is it going to nullify in the majority? Okay, that's really what it's asking. What it's really saying is, are the laws of Meduma going to be applied from the Doraita rules over here to the Derabanan rules of Demai? Now, that's why it's going to be talking about Trumas Meiser of Demai, and it's not going to be talking about Meiser Shini. Why is it talking about the Trumas Meiser of Demai? Because if you have Meiser Rishon, and you take out the Trumas Meiser, and it falls back into it, you have Tevel. Okay, that's on the Doraita level, right? You have to separate two things out, so it's not going to have definite Tevel. One, you have to have the Truma Gedola. That's going to go to the Kohanim. And you have to take out the second set of tithes that also goes to the tribe of the Kohanim. That from the Meiser Rishon, that is going to be the Trumas Meiser. That's why we're talking about Trumas Meiser of Demai, because over in Meiser Sheni of Demai, or Meiser Sheni regular, if you drop back in Meiser Sheni into a pile, you don't make it into something that could be tevel. But in the case of where the Amaretz did definitely separated out Truma Gedola, so you don't have tevel from that side. The question is going to be, well, maybe Trumas Meiser was not taken out. And so if they're taking out Trumas Meiser of Demai, that's what it's asking. Okay. Now, when this is all Doraita, when the grain that grows out of the ground in Eretz Yisrael is going to be where, if you don't tithe it, it's definitely tevel. That, by the way, is not the case here in this Gemara in this time, and it hasn't been the time since the destruction of the first temple. The majority opinion, as we saw here in chapter 3, Halacha 4 of Demai, is that the majority said that the Ole Bavel, when they came back, they're basically saying that D'Rabbanan Kedusha to the land, it did not give D'Oraita Kedusha of the land, so that when you're growing grain, that it would be definite tevel. It's going to be where you have to tithe it on a D'Rabbanan case. Now, in the final redemption of Am Yisrael, when Am Yisrael comes back and they're going to settle everybody back in the tribes into the right areas, and everything goes back to being Doraita, then you have a case where none of this is going to be Demai. And if you separated out Truma Gedola, if the Amar separated out Truma Gedola, you purchase this, and now you're talking about the Truma Meiser. If you don't get the Truma Meiser right, that the pile that you have there is going to be definite tevel, even if you took out the Truma Gedola. Now, when it's Doraita and you're going to take out the Truma Meiser, that can render a pile back into tevel. Now, the question's going to come when you're dropping this Trumas Meiser back into the Demai, back into the pile. What's it going to be? Do you get the laws of Meduma or not? So, I know it's a little bit long-winded. I want to give this little introduction to make it easy for you to understand before we get into these rather complex Gemaras. So, the Gemara, by the way, is talking about this as a Maloket Tanayim, about what is going to be the status of the Demai when it falls back into a pile. That's really a Maloket, and really ultimately the crux is going to be, do laws of Meduma get applied over to Demai or not? So the Gemara starts off and it says, it was taught in a Baraisa that Trumas Meiser of Demai that returns to its place, in other words, it falls back into the produce from which it was separated, renders the mixture prohibited to non-Kohanim as Meduma. Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say, but if it fell not into its original place, it fell into other hulin, it does not render the mixture prohibited to non-Kohanim as Meduma. So this is going to be, says the Gemara, the words of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is saying that, and it's a very nuanced argument, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that you have a problem if you take your Truma Meiser of Demai and it falls back into the pile that you took it from. Then you have a problem. But if it falls into a different pile, you didn't make the other pile into Meduma. That's going to be the argument of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, the sages are going to ask a question. And by the way, it's going to come up that in some way, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Eliezer are actually going to be agreeing in some way. That's going to be interesting. But anyway, Gemara continues, says, but the sages say whether it returned to its place, in other words, the pile that you took it out from, or whether it fell not into its place, in other words, it fell into a different pile, it renders the mixture prohibited to non-Kohanim as Meduma. So the sages are saying that although the sanctity of Truma Meiser of Demai is going to be rabbinic, it's going to be treated as the same as Trumas Meiser separated from definite tevel. And that is going to make it prohibited in any mixture containing less than 100 parts of chulin as Meduma. If it fell into a different pile or it fell into the same pile, you now have a Meduma. And now all the laws of Meduma are going to apply according to the sages. That is a big chiddush. Now, I want to point out that according to the commentary of the Rosh in the Mishnah, that this Mishnah is specifying, according to the Rosh, that Trumas Meiser of Demai, that returns to its place, in other words, it falls back into that pile, is going to follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that Trumas Meiser of Demai does not render chulin produce Meduma unless it mixes with the very same chulin from which it was separated. So that looks like it's going to follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is going to have a different opinion. Okay, so there's three opinions here. Rabbi Shimon says whether it returned to its place or whether it fell back not into its place, it does not render the mixture prohibited to non-Kohanim as Meduma. So what he's saying is it becomes nullified in a simple majority, and Rabbi Shimon maintains that the rabbinic Trumas Meiser of Demai never renders the mixture Meduma. And effectively what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying is that Meduma is really, all of the laws of Meduma are really just for when tithes are going to be doraita, not derabanan. It doesn't get, all of these rules of Meduma don't get extended over to the derabanan things. That's effectively the position of Rabbi Shimon. That's why it would be nullified just in the majority. So we're going to look at the three opinions here, and we're going to explain it. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is going to end up being the most difficult. So let's start off first. The Gemara says, Rabbi Ban Bar Chia asked in the presence of Rabbi Zera, the one, in other words, this is going to be the sages, the Tanakama, who say that the Truma Meiser of Demai renders Meduma when it falls back into its place and renders Meduma when it falls not into its place. And likewise, Rabbi Shimon, who says that Trumas Meiser of Demai does not render Meduma when it falls back into its place and does not render Meduma when it falls not into its place, are fine. In other words, what this is saying is consistent. They're both saying consistent. And in their opinions, the Trumas Meiser of Demai is going to render Meduma produce Meduma. And Rabbi Shimon is still going to be consistent in his opinion that Trumas Meiser of Demai is not going to be treated as actual Trumas Meiser, and it never renders chulin Meduma. Now, the position of Rabbi Eliezer is difficult. And the Gemara says, however, Rabbi Eliezer's position, the one Rabbi Eliezer who says that when Trumas Meiser of Demai returns to its place, it renders the mixture Meduma. If you drop it into a different pile, it does not become Meduma. And the Gemara is going to ask a question, what is the difference between whether it fell into its own place or into a different place? What's going to be the difference? Pnei Moshe says, since Rabbi Eliezer holds that the Meduma decree was applied even to rabbinic Trumas Meiser of Demai, why is it not applied to the case where it falls into other chulin produce? That's the big question. The Gemara is going to provide an explanation of Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Here's how it goes. The Gemara says, Rabbi Haggai entered the study hall, and the scholars said among themselves, in this situation, Rabbi Haggai will certainly say, I swear by Moses that I will say a reason for Rabbi Eliezer's distinction. So Rabbi Haggai would often say this in the Yerushalmi Shas. He would say where he would swear by Moses, and you see this, Rabbi Haggai says this in Yerushalmi Yoma 1:1, Megillah 1:10, Sanhedrin 2:1, also comes up in Horayos 3:2, and this is basically how he's going to answer it. And regarding this concept of swearing by Moses, the Rosh Cirilio is going to explain that it means that he's swearing by the honor of Moses, and that the Rambam, by the way, says when you swear by the God of Moses, it indicates that swearing by Moses has no legal validity. But anyway, this is what he says, and it gives a little flavor. And it says, as predicted, Rabbi Haggai said, I swear by Moses, I will say the reason. Rabbi Haggai goes and gives the explanation, and it says, that which he said, in other words, which Rabbi Eliezer said, that when Trumas Meiser of Demai returns to its place, it renders the produce Trumas Meiser of Demai permitted, and the remaining produce for consumption. In essence, Rabbi Eliezer is holding, like Rabbi Shimon, that the Meduma stringencies applied only to biblical Trumas Meiser and not to rabbinic Trumas Meiser of Demai. And that's why he's ruling that when Trumas Meiser of Demai falls into other chulin, it becomes nullified in a simple majority, and it does not turn this mixture into Meduma. However, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that when it falls back into the chulin produce from which it was separated, we have no choice but to treat the mixture as Meduma, since the produce was rendered chulin by virtue of the designation of this Trumas Meiser. So it would be inherently contradictory, according to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, to say that it is not bona fide Trumas Meiser vis-a-vis the produce itself. And if we're not going to consider it Trumas Meiser with respect to rendering this produce Meduma, then we can't consider it Trumas Meiser with regards to rectifying the produce in the first place. So that, in a nutshell, is going to be Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, and that which he said, that when it falls into other chulin does not render the mixture Meduma, is because the Trumas Meiser of Demai did not permit the remaining produce for consumption. So to finish up Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, according to the explanation of the Vilna Goan in his Beur, it's going to say, according to Vilna Goan, that since the Truma Meiser did not serve to permit the produce in which it became mixed, we can exempt the mixture from the stringencies of biblical Trumas Meiser without appearing inconsistent. Now, that's the Mara Fulda, by the way, I just want to note that has a very interesting and unique way to explain it. And he's going to explain it like this. He's going to say that the Gemara is answering that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, although the Meduma decree was not enacted with regard to Trumas Meiser of Demai, when Trumas Meiser of Demai falls back into its own produce, the produce may not be eaten, not because of the Meduma prohibition, but because it reverts back to its original tevel status. That's a novelty, as explained by the Mara Fulda, to explain why Rabbi Eliezer's position seems or looks like it's inconsistent. So the Gemara is going to cite a ruling on the matter. Rabbi La ruled in according with this reasoning of Rabbi Chagai. In other words, he's saying that Rabbi Hagai's reasoning to explain Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is compelling. So that's going to be the reasoning. The Gemara now is going to go into a conflict that comes up with Rabbi Shimon Shizuri. Now, what's happening with Rabbi Shimon Shizuri's argument is there's a main novelty that the Amma Arts can be relied upon with respect to a mixture of Trumas Meiser. But there's really inside of there an additional ruling that's implicit in the statement. And that's going to be that it looks like he's accepting the view of Rabbi Eliezer that Trumas Meiser of Demai is going to render Meduma only when it falls back into the original place. And there's also, by the way, going to be coming up a opinion by Rabbi Yonatan here, as well as in the Bavli, and it's going to look like there is actually going to be a maloket between Yerushalmi and Bavli. However, when you're looking at Rabbi Shimon Shizuri's argument, and this is going to be the inside of the Mara Fulda, that really it splits into two arguments. There's a main argument, a main novelty, and inside of this novelty is going to be what happens when it falls into its own pile or a different pile. That really, that's going to be the case where Yerushalmi is going to be looking at one of these cases, and the Bavli is going to be looking at the other case, and really there's going to be no contradiction. So Rabbi Zera says an incident involving Trumas Meiser of Demai that returns to its own place came before Rabbi Hanina, and he ruled in accordance with Rabbi Shimon Shizuri that the Amma Arts may be asked, even during the week, whether the produce was tithed, and his testimony can be relied upon. So why would you be able to rely on the testimony? Again, because the laws of Meduma would be overriding the Darabanan aspect of Demai. That's really effectively what it's saying. In other words, the Tanakama are going to say whether it falls into its own pile or it falls into a different pile, you have Meduma. And they're going to say that the laws of Meduma are going to basically be applying and get extended over from the Doraita obligation, and it's also going to be for the Darabanan obligation. That's why you're going to be caring about the laws of Meduma. That means that the laws of Meduma are going to be have a stringency and a Doraita at a Doraita level. And really, the testimony by the Am Haaretz really is not going to have the weight, but really it's just going to be like what Rabbi Yochanan said in the beginning of chapter 4, Halacha 1, that they were looking for a pretext to allow it. And this is going to basically be a pretext as well to allow where they're going to allow the testimony of the Am Haaretz even during the week, and the testimony can be relied upon. That's a big Hiddush. So the Gemara continues, and Rabbi Acha says in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, the halacha does not accord with Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. Now, I want to point out that, and you can find this over in Bavli Chulin 75b, it's saying over there that Rabbi Yonatan is ruling the halacha does go with Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. And so it looks like there's a contradiction, but really there's not a contradiction. Really, the novelty that we're seeing here, again explained by Marafulda, is that the Am Haaretz is relied upon when, with respect to a mixture of Trumas Meiser, and when it's going to fall back into its own place. And then the question is, well, what happens if it fell back into a different place? And so that's where we're going to see that there's really not going to be a difference. In other words, where it's saying the halacha does not accord with Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, Rabbi Shimon Shazuri in this second part is saying, well, if it falls into a different place, the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Eliezer, where it's going to be nullified in a simple majority. And so in the first novelty, where it falls back into its own place, it's going to be treated like Meduma. But if it's going to fall into a different pile, it's going to be nullified a simple majority, and Meduma does not apply. So that's why they're saying over here, Rabbi Acha says in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, the halacha does not accord with Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. And in fact, that would be true. That's not the halacha if you separate out Trumas Meiser of Demai and it falls back into a different pile. You did not, it's not going to be like Rabbi Eliezer, it's going to be like the sages. And the sages are saying that if it drops into a different pile, that is also going to be a Meduma. So the Brisa is going to talk about an additional lenient ruling by Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, and this, by the way, is going to be coming up in Tosefta 5.3. So here's what the other leniency is. It says, moreover, Rabbi Shimon HaShazuri used to say, if one designated Demai produce located elsewhere as Trumas Meiser for Demai, produce that he had within his house, and then later on he found that the designated produce was burned, and it's unknown whether it was burned before it was designated as Trumas Meiser or after, so it's uncertain whether the Demai in his house had been tithed. Now, if you have a case where the fire happened before the tithes, you're not sure if it's tithed, because the only thing that you have left is the actual pile. In other words, I have some grain here in my house here, and have some grain over there in the yeshiva, and a fire happened. Okay, if the fire happened in the yeshiva, God forbid, and that grain got burnt before I separated my tithes here on behalf of that, then I didn't do the tithes because that grain doesn't exist. and it went out of existence. That's the problem. If the grain stayed in existence, then it was tithed, and then if it got burnt later, then it's going to be where it got burnt later, but the tithes were taken out, and what you have there is valid. So the Gemara says that he asked the Am Haaretz who sold him the produce whether he tithed the produce before the sale, and he may eat the produce in the house based on his word. That's what Rabbi Shimon Shazuri is saying based on it. So even if the fire might have happened earlier, and maybe it doesn't disqualify it, you're going to be allowed to do it. That is a big leniency. And by the way, that leniency is only going to be there based on all of this being Demai and D'Rabbanan. When it's D'Oraita, you can't rely on that. So the Gemara is going to comment. It's going to say it was not with regard to this situation that Rabbi Zera said that an incident came before Rabbi Hanina and he ruled in accordance with Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. So I want to point out the Vilna Goan's commentary on it because I think it's so good about this produce getting burned. The Vilna Goan explains that the Brisa deals with a case where the chulin was burned and the produce designated as Trumas Meiser remains. And the Brisa is teaching that if the Am Haaretz testifies that he had tithed the produce before selling it, this Tana is going to say that the buyer can rely on the testimony, the produce, that he had mistakenly designated as Trumas Meiser. And Rabbi Shimon Shazuri is ruling leniently in the case because of the concern that the buyer who lost the produce that he bought. And the other reason that Rabbi Kanievsky brings up in his Beur shiurim is going to be due to the fact that the Am Haaretz is not going to be suspected to lie and cause others to eat forbidden Trumas Meiser. So the Gemara is going to explain how somebody is going to go ask the Am Haaretz in Rabbi Shimon Shazuri's case of Truma Meiser that returns back to its place. So it's very nice that you're going to go back and you're going to ask the Am Haaretz. How do you do it so you're going to get a truthful or as truthful as possible as testimony? How do you do it? What do you say? So Rabbi Avin's going to explain it. He's going to say that the question is not similar to the first one employed when questioning the Am Haaretz on Shabbat. So he's saying you can't just do the same thing like Shabbat. And there, in the case of Shabbat, he's going to ask in an indirect manner. He's going to say, it's not because I suspect you of willingly selling untithed produce, but because I brought wheat from you yesterday, and I saw a large crowd of buyers around you, and I said to myself, perhaps on account of the tumult, you forgot to tithe the produce and rectify it. And, the question continues, says, was the produce indeed rectified? So that's going to be the case over there. Over there in Shabbat, that's how you're going to go ask it. Over here, Rabbi Avin's saying, but it doesn't work that way in this case. You got to do it differently. And the Gemara says over here, where the buyer must admit that he had separated Trumas Meiser from the produce, which is going to prove that he suspected the Am Haaretz of selling him untithed produce, he has no choice but to say to him, because I suspected you of selling untithed produce, and I therefore rectified the produce by designating it as Trumas Meiser, and it then happened that the Trumas Meiser returned to its place. So now he says, I must know the truth. Was the produce actually tithed when I brought it from you, so that my Trumas Meiser designation was meaningless, and the produce in which it fell is going to be permitted? Or was I correct in suspecting you that my Trumas Meiser designation actually did take effect, and the produce it fell into is going to be Meduma? So this is a very direct way of questioning. You're basically saying, okay, I have to know because I have Trumas Meiser here, and I need to know what is the status of all this, and I have to know, and you have to tell me. And what's gonna be is that you're relying on the awe of Truma Meiser effectively, and effectively you're saying that even the Am Haaretz is not going to want somebody to eat tevel and something that's not rectified. So the Gemara is going to support for this contention that you're going to basically be informing the Am Haaretz that he's already separated out, Trumos, and you're going to be asking in this very, very blunt, direct manner. And, I get the benefit of teaching my son, Aaron Udalade Torah, who's 6 months old today and a little bit tired. But anyway, we're going to finish this up, and the resolution is going to go like this. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, says, the son of Rabbi Bun says, Bar Kapara taught in a brisa and said, Rabbi Shimon Shazuri says, even during the week, he may ask the seller and eat on the basis of his word, because the awe of Meduma is upon him, and he says the truth. In other words, since we believe the Amaretz, and again, you're asking him in a very blunt way, it's imperative to make him aware that the purchaser is already designated Trumas Meiser. And basically this awe of Meduma upon him, this is going to look like the Tosefta, by the way, in Ketubot 55b, and it's basically going to be where the haver tithed the produce without having first asked whether it had been tithed. And the Amaretz, yes, he's going to be, suspected of being untrustworthy, but he has to still ask, and you have to ask directly because it's very serious to go and eat something that is a Meduma. And so that's why the Amaretz is going to be careful not to let this guy go and eat a Meduma. And I know this is very complicated, but you get a lot of benefit in Shemayim for studying these D'Rabbanan issues and for trying to get into the depths of Halacha. Have a great day.